College football nerds here to review LSU in Texas. In the preview, we flagged this as possibly being a huge slugfest, and it turned out to be that. So we want to discuss what happened in a 45-38 showing. First, want to remind y'all, obviously, like and subscribe. Somebody told me the other day that it's not a like, it's a thumbs up, but it's universal, y'all. It's like. Subscribe really helps out the channel. Want to also remind you, we do an audio version of this. It's in Google Play. It's in iTunes. It might take a little while for it to get out there. Usually by Wednesday, we have it out there. You can always check us out, collegefootballnerds.com. We post the audio, full audio there as well. It takes us a little while. We both have big kid jobs, so, just bear with us. All right, Josh, huge game, high scoring. The big takeaway from this for a lot of people is these are supposed to be two super powerful defenses, but 45-38, I maintain that it was super hot. It impacted the depth that wasn't there for both teams, and as the game went on, they were just gassed. They just didn't have anything in the tank. But others are saying that there's depth concerns, there's other things there. So give me your number one thing that you think contributed to such a high score if it's not the heat.
So, obviously, I think the heat was a factor in the game, but I think the biggest thing that happened, and it was a compounding component from the heat, it was really injuries and depth on the side for LSU and probably inexperience for Texas. So, on the LSU side, their defensive line rotation is really too deep. You've got Lawrence and Fehoko at defensive end that are very good players, and you got Logan and Farrell as backups. Logan is the primary backup, Farrell is second. And then at nose tackle, you have Shelvin and Ika. But quite frequently under Orgeron, they like to run what is essentially 3 DNs, particularly when they're playing a passing team like Texas was for most of this game. That's fine when you have guys that can rotate in. But what happened is you lost your probably by far best lineman in Rashard Lawrence. That forced Glenn Logan to effectively become a starter. And when they wanted to brush the passer, that brought in Farrell in place of Shelvin. That means that your only string of quality, experienced defensive linemen are playing as the first string every snap. And there really wasn't anybody that was a veteran player they could rotate in. The starters kind of got overwhelmed. The play count got ahead of them. I think when you combine the fact that Fulton is in and out of the lineup, that Divinity's in and out of the lineup, that really had an impact, and a lot of that was due to the heat. But I think that depth issue really bit LSU, particularly about halfway through the game.
Yeah, and we flagged this in our preview that they didn't have a great pass rush last year, LSU, and getting Chason back is a big deal. But if his whole job in 100-degree heat is to just rush that quarterback, it's going to play into the depth concerns over time, and we saw that affect their pass rush. Joe Burrow had a huge game in this one, 31-39, 471, and his highest yards per attempt average, I think, in his career. Interestingly enough, Sam Ehlinger did have a 400-yard game, but he threw 47 passes, 8.5 per attempt, which I think it's less than a yard ahead of his normal game in the Big 12. So it wasn't like he was just like out of his mind. He had a great game. I'm not saying he didn't. But because he threw 47 passes and ran the ball 19 times, they had a lot of plays. Do you think that impacted LSU at all, given that LSU was on the other side throwing a lot of bombs and scoring relatively quickly in a lot of their possessions?
I definitely think it was a significant factor, because what tended to happen is LSU, for the most part, scored quickly. A couple times they ended up punting quickly, but their possessions were a lot shorter. And you had 68 plays for LSU, and you had 85 plays for Texas. And so, that 20-play disparity just about, it's about a third more plays run by Texas than LSU. Obviously, they didn't result in scores any more than LSU's did, but it was just consistent, sustained drives. I think that really wore on LSU the entire game. It's not even like as the game went on kind of thing. It's just LSU's defense, I don't think at any point ever was able to catch their breath because the drives were so sustained. And time of possession was about 8 minutes more for Texas than LSU, kind of the same problem. And it did create an interesting scenario where LSU's yards per play in a lot of ways was a lot higher than Texas's, but the scoring differential wasn't all that much different because, and we talk about this a lot, especially once you cross like the 6 yard per play mark, you're making first downs. And what was happening is LSU was almost getting too much yardage too quickly in too big of chunks, to where the drives were getting a lot faster. But Texas was also able to move the chains quite effectively, just in more plays, which led to almost as many points, but just requiring the defense to be on the field more.
I have this theory, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to kind of roll your eyes and tell me that I'm crazy, but I have this theory that in big games, a lot of times we see a lot higher score than we normally would, and especially in college. I think we see it too in the NFL, but maybe not in the Super Bowl. Looking back to all of these national championship games with going all the way back to like Auburn and Florida State and Alabama and Clemson, all the Alabama and Clemson games except for the most recent one, it's been a back and forth, high scoring affair with two elite or borderline elite defenses. Do you think there's something to that this was kind of a playoff stage type atmosphere and game and everything that's on the line for these two conferences? Do you think that kind of played into it as well, or is my theory just kind of unfounded and I'm crazy?
We've definitely seen this happen quite a bit in these big games, and it's hard to break down exactly why. I think the biggest thing is just like in the NFL, the best teams are able to score consistently. I'll give you an interesting point here with Sam Ehlinger versus LSU and draw a parallel. 31 of 47, 8.5 yards per attempt. When you look back at 2015 Alabama-Clemson, right? 2015 Alabama-Clemson. That's the one Alabama won narrowly at the end of the game, but Deshaun Watson put on an absolute show. Deshaun Watson was 30 of 47 for 8.6 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns and 1 interception. That's the same yard per attempt average, same number of attempts. It's just Ehlinger had one more completion than Watson did. And for the same number of touchdowns, just that Watson threw an interception. So you've got almost, again, 30 of 47 versus 31 of 47, 8.5 versus 8.6, both 4 touchdown. You had almost the exact same performance from Ehlinger and Deshaun Watson in that game. And I think there's a lot to unpack there. One of it is you're throwing the ball 47 times, which means you're scoring about once every 12, 13 passes. That's a lot. That's not necessarily overwhelming. But on the other side of the ball, this is what you got with Joe Burrow, which is, I think, more confusing. Joe Burrow in this game was 12.1 yards per attempt. Now, that's the highest average that Joe Burrow has had in any game in his career. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, but this is a new look LSU's offense, and we're a lot better at throwing the ball. But something to bear in mind is, even if they're a lot better, do you expect Joe Burrow to be better throwing the ball on Texas than he was last year against an Ole Miss defense that might have been the worst defense that's ever set foot on the face of the earth? And moreover, I'll note that his yard per attempt average was higher than any player's season average from last year, including Kyler Murray, in a really porous Big 12 with a lot worse defenses. So on one hand, I think with Ehlinger, you have what was actually kind of literally was a Deshaun Watson performance, which was very good, but it was a lot of throwing balls and basically just sustaining drives and scoring points. And on the other hand, from Joe Burrow, you had what is almost undoubtedly an unsustainably good performance in terms of yard per attempt. No one ever hits those averages on the season, much less at a defense of that caliber. That hints to me that Ehlinger had a game, and that was an elite game. And what, frankly, it hints to me on the Texas side is Texas's defense probably has some issues, be it in the pass rush or pass defense, because no one should have that kind of average. And even like Deshaun Watson against Alabama was about, that's a 50% higher yard per play average than he averaged in those games.
And I also want to note back to my Heat theory that both of these defenses, yes, LSU scored late in the second quarter to make it look like they were really about to run up a number, which they ended up doing. They scored late in the second quarter, but both of these defenses were doing very well for almost the entire half of football, and then they just both fell apart. And the first thing to go in this game was the pass rush. I'm a little more concerned for Texas than I am LSU in the pass rush situation, because Burrow was not really – he had a clean pocket almost all night. And he made some throws, especially a couple of touchdown throws that were absolute dimes. They were beautiful passes. But like you said, I don't know that it's sustainable. And LSU fans right now are rolling their eyes. They're going to talk Joe Brady, they're going to talk Joe Burrow, and they're going to tell us how great LSU's offense is and that they're going to rattle off 471 for 12.1 per against Alabama and Georgia if they see them. And I'm with you. I don't think that's sustainable. Look, either you have to believe that Joe Burrow is about to put up the greatest quarterback season in college football history, or at some point he's going to come back to earth. Now, having said that, maybe we both agree here that this is also an outlier for the LSU defense in the other direction, and that when Joe Burrow comes back to earth in his passing ability, maybe still really good, the LSU defense is going to be the LSU defense we expect. Therefore, LSU is still probably a great team coming out of this in their averages.
I think so. And I want to take 1 second to make clear to LSU fans, because some people may take this point wrong. When we talk about coming back down to earth, what we're saying is that 12.1 average, that's unsustainable because it's not even an elite average. That is literally highest of all time average, if that was a season average. So if he has, let's say he drops that by a quarter and he finishes at 9 yards per play, that would be right at what Dwayne Haskins averaged last year in a Heisman campaign, okay?
It'd be the best LSU quarterbacking season in LSU history.
If he did a quarter less than he did in that game, that would be the best in LSU history. 12 yards per attempt would be the best any quarterback has ever had, period, ever, which he didn't even have that average right against in the opener. So those numbers are unsustainable because they're, those are like a spectacular one-off in the zone sort of game numbers that nobody has ever been able to sustain. But taking it a step further, talking about the defense, we already noted there was a lot going on with the heat and how that affected things. I think LSU's defense is going to be a lot better when they're not so exhausted, when they're not banged up. I thought they were able to generate a fair amount of pressure with Chase on in that game. I thought he was effective. Now, I'll push back a little bit and say that he tended to come off with a speed rush, and when he got engaged, he struggled a little bit, which is going to be an interesting thing when they play teams that maybe can run the ball a touch better. But I did think the defense was pretty good at getting pressure. And then, I'll flip back the other way. When we're talking about Texas, and you touched on this, I mean, the pass rush was a little concerning. And I think the biggest thing that impacted them and that helped Burrow, Texas really relied on the blitz in this game. And they were able to generate some pressure, but they created a lot of one-on-one opportunities because Texas was not able to generate pressure with 4. They relied on guys like Osai to pressure the passer, which means they're not available to help in coverage, which in things like the RPO means Burrow has, rather than looking for the linebacker to drop back in coverage, he's got the linebacker coming in at the snap. He's able to throw the seam without anybody in the lane. And again, this is why 12 yards per attempt is unsustainable. If you got somebody in the lane, it doesn't matter how good the quarterback is, you can't complete the throw because there's not a lane to throw it. I don't know that either one of these teams is going to face anybody but maybe Alabama and Oklahoma that are that good. But there were, positives and negatives on both sides.
Okay, so with Texas, I do have some concerns, like you said, in regards to their defense. We did talk about them reloading on defense and not necessarily having that reset given all the players they lost. I still think they're going to be the best or the second best defense that Oklahoma faces this year. And I'm still not convinced that just because they gave up 45 here to LSU that they're going to give up 55 to Oklahoma. My concern, though, is that I do believe that Oklahoma's defense is better. But where we were on Texas in the preview and in our season preview for Texas, where we kind of gave them a hard time and said there's some red flags with playing LSU close, playing Kansas State close, losing to teams like you shouldn't, like Oklahoma State. Did this performance against LSU tell you that this win-loss, whatever aside, the team you saw Saturday night is the team that's ready to take the next step in regards to dominating in the games that they should and showing up for the games that are tough?
I thought they definitely took a step forward. And, like you said, and like we've said, there's some things to work on, particularly defensively. I thought Green for Texas kind of got exposed in this game, and it felt like LSU could target him whenever they wanted. But those things are going to get mopped up. And I thought what was more important to a certain degree was that like Duvernay and Ingram and Johnson were consistent playmakers for Texas. And in those games where you're playing an opponent that's maybe not quite on your level in terms of talent level, the way you beat those teams is by having guys like that you can get the ball to, and they can get you 6 or 7 yards consistently. And what I saw from Texas was consistent offense and consistent production from those players. And if they're able to do that, and they're able to throw the ball in a swing pass to Duvernay and just let him run for 7 yards or 8 yards, that's what keeps you from losing to a team that you should normally lose to. Now, they may give up some points in some games, I think, from teams that can really throw the ball, because we saw that their defense can be attacked. And if you don't have an elite pass rush, you're always vulnerable to that. We've said that in a couple of videos this year. But I do think Texas is much better positioned to win a lot of those games, because I think the offense is better positioned to consistently score points. And the defense is very young, and they're going to come around, and they're going to be a better team than they are at the end of the year than they are right now. And then sort of, leaving it with a negative, and then we'll circle back to a positive. I was a little concerned by the run game in this game. The LSU was 3.5 yards per attempt. Texas was 3.3 yards per attempt. So if there's one concern, it's that maybe both these teams aren't quite improved in the run game than they were last year. Which, again, neither one of them was elite. But maybe that's also a sign that both these defenses are just really good against the run. I do think at the end of the day, though, with LSU, and I've said this before this season, I said it in the preview with how I thought they stacked up. I think LSU is a genuine playoff national title contender. I think they've got all the pieces to win at the high level. They've got a quarterback that was extremely efficient in this game, much more efficient and accurate. Again, this was the guy that everybody rides, including us, for being a 50% passer all last year. I don't care if he's throwing against air. Just the fact that he's throwing at this kind of a completion percentage tells me that there's improvement either schematically or in terms of what he's able to do, or the receivers. The defense looks extremely talented. All the pieces are there for LSU to compete at a high level, and that also means for Texas to have this game that close. If I do believe that about LSU, that means that Texas is a borderline playoff contender, depending on how much this game hurts them, which, I don't think it matters if they win the conference.
So, real quick on the rushing game, I was surprised we didn't see John Ehlinger, given that Leonard Fournette, I think it's clear at this point, is not a game breaker. He didn't get a lot of carries, he didn't get a lot of touches in this game, but I think that one of the things that they lacked, even with, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 5.8 yards per attempt is not bad, but they needed a game breaker and they didn't have it. Emory can be that guy. So I think the running game for LSU can improve throughout the year. I didn't love what I saw from Ingram for Texas. Ehlinger is going to be that guy run the ball for them mostly anyway. So one last question to you is about the playoffs. We talked in a couple of our previews about how important these SEC games versus big-time out-of-conference opponents might impact the playoff, standing at the end of the year, and how we view these things. We flagged 3 games: Auburn versus Oregon, LSU versus Texas, and Georgia versus Notre Dame. So far, SEC is 2-0 in these games. How much does this game potentially give LSU not a pass, but a little breathing room should they lose to Alabama later in the year?
I think it probably gives them a significant backdoor. We've already seen an SEC team in Alabama get in the playoffs despite not winning the division before. It's happened. And what just happened with LSU beating Texas, and I kind of hate to say this for Texas fans because I think the team's going to be a lot better at the end of the year, and that's going to be probably part of the discussion. But let's say Texas runs a gauntlet and wins the playoff, or wins the Big 12, okay, and they go undefeated through the rest of the season. And let's say Texas loses to Alabama, doesn't win the division, and Alabama wins the conference in the SEC without ever losing a game. You're going to have a situation then where you've got an 11-1 LSU and you've got a 12-1 Texas who's a conference champion. And I kind of hedge towards thinking the committee is not going to put Texas in ahead of LSU when LSU won head-to-head and they have the same number. At Texas, and they have the same number of losses. Now, at that point, Texas will have had to have beaten Oklahoma twice, more than likely, because I don't really see anybody, frankly, but Texas and Oklahoma in that championship game right now. But, the whole problem is Texas is Texas's whole win column is going to probably be based on Oklahoma and Oklahoma alone. And it's kind of hurt them that they beat Oklahoma twice, because now Oklahoma's guaranteed 2 losses themselves. So they're going to be no better than a top 15 team. Whereas LSU gets the fact that they beat a top 10 team in Texas. And again, they have that head-to-head.
So with Washington taking an L to Cal, which is crazy, and Clemson really having the ACC, they're not going to lose this year. Clemson will not lose this year. They have a ticket punched already. I know it's week 2, and it's a ridiculous thing to say. They're going to the playoffs. SEC champion is going to go to the playoffs. Big 12 or Big 10, if Ohio State wins, I think that pretty much makes it a clean slot for them as well. Does this mean that Texas, regardless of whether or not they win the Big 12, needs to be a huge Georgia fan for that Notre Dame game coming up?
Yeah, I think so. Because if Notre Dame were to beat Georgia, which is your point, and you may want to see the SEC go down, but if Notre Dame beats Georgia, Notre Dame has a solid chance of running the slate. And given Texas's position, I think Texas is going to be at a serious disadvantage to Notre Dame now. And Notre Dame would be likely to take that slot, so you end up with the SEC champion, the Big Ten champion, and the ACC champion. And what I mean by that is if, let's say, a one-loss Georgia who lost to Notre Dame wins the SEC, because Texas has already lost to the SEC champion is probably going to get in over Texas. I'm not saying it's fair or not saying that's my opinion on how it should be. I'm saying that's probably what the committee will end up doing. So I think Texas wants Georgia to beat Notre Dame. I think the best thing for Texas in a lot of ways is to root for LSU to run the gauntlet and to win the SEC. Because if LSU wins the SEC, then your argument from Texas is, well, we lost to maybe the best team in the country. We can be better than anybody else except maybe Clemson, which means at worst we're 3. If Alabama beats LSU, that's when things get really murky, and it gets even murkier if, let's say, Alabama beats LSU and then Georgia were to win the SEC championship. I think that's almost a nightmare scenario because then Georgia's the SEC champion's probably getting in, and then LSU's probably getting in. But regardless, I think if Alabama and Georgia are playing and LSU only has 1 loss, you're probably going to get 2 SEC teams in before Texas can get in.
All right, y'all. That's our review for this one, LSU and Texas. I think Texas has still got a ton to play for, including a possible playoff berth. So Texas fans, don't be too down after this one. It was a great game, and I think that coming out of this, Texas got a lot of improved perception of that program, kind of on the verge of being back. We're going to do a top 10 video, hopefully during this session, so posted Monday, where we discuss our top 10s, which we don't usually do something like that. So keep an eye out for that, where we will discuss. I have a rant about Texas slipping after the loss to LSU when I think they should have actually either moved up or stayed the same. So keep an eye out for that one. Thanks so much, y'all, for watching this. Have a great week, and God bless.